You're sitting across the table when it happens. A comment, sharp and casual, slips into the conversation. An accusation disguised as concern. A manager questions your judgment. A colleague implies incompetence. A friend twists your words in front of others. The room tightens. Your chest contracts. Your mind races to assemble evidence, context, explanations. You feel the urge to speak now, to clarify, to defend, to prove you're not what they suggest. Your pulse rises because everything in you believes silence means guilt. That instinct feels righteous. It feels intelligent. It feels necessary. And yet, it is often the moment you lose. The reflex to defend yourself is not strength. It is exposure. The moment you rush to explain, you accept the accuser's frame. You signal that they have the authority to judge you and that you must earn your position back. What looks like confidence is frequently submission disguised as logic. In power dynamics, justification is rarely neutral. It is a concession. Most accusations are not about truth. They are probes, tests of boundaries, attempts to establish dominance or provoke emotional movement. Machiavellian psychology exposes what polite society avoids admitting. Power is not determined by who is correct, but by who controls the narrative, the tempo, and the emotional center of the interaction. The one who reacts first is already playing defense. Silence disrupts this game. Non-reaction fractures the expected script. Refusing to justify yourself denies manipulators the fuel they seek. When there is no explanation to dismantle, no emotion to hook into, aggressors are forced to reveal more than they intended. They escalate, overreach, contradict themselves. Their insecurity surfaces because the control they expected never arrives. Silence as power is counterintuitive because it feels unnatural in a culture obsessed with defending yourself. But restraint creates asymmetry. It shifts pressure outward. It transforms social manipulation into a liability for the attacker. This psychological breakdown will dismantle the belief that self-defense equals intelligence and replace it with a sharper understanding of control, accusation, and dominance that permanently alters how you move through conflict in power dynamics. The moment an accusation appears, an invisible structure snaps into place. One person speaks as if they are evaluating reality, and the other is subtly pushed into the role of responding to it. This is not a conversation between equals. It is an unspoken courtroom where one side assumes the authority to question, interpret, and conclude, while the other is pressured to explain, justify, and comply. The act of defending yourself does not challenge this structure. It completes it. When you explain yourself, you implicitly agree that the accusation deserves an answer. You grant legitimacy to the premise before it has ever been proven. In terms of power dynamics, this is critical. Authority flows to the individual who defines what must be responded to. By reacting defensively, you accept their framing and place your status beneath theirs. The exchange stops being about facts and becomes about hierarchy. Justification is especially damaging because it signals emotional dependence. The need to clarify communicates that their perception of you matters more than your own internal certainty. Over-explaining reveals anxiety about how you're seen and a desire for validation. From a psychological standpoint, this reads as vulnerability. Not vulnerability in the sense of honesty, but vulnerability as leverage. It tells the other person exactly where to press. Machiavellian psychology strips away comforting illusions about fairness and intention. Power is not awarded to the most logical argument or the most accurate account. It is granted to the person who controls perception. Defensive behavior hands over that control. The accuser no longer needs evidence. Your reaction becomes the evidence. The more urgently you explain, the more you appear destabilized, and the more credible the accusation feels to observers, regardless of its truth. This is why defensive responses rarely end attacks. They energize them. When someone reacts defensively, The aggressor experiences confirmation. They sense influence. They feel that their words landed. This emboldens escalation. The accusation sharpens, expands, or multiplies because the attacker now understands that you are emotionally invested in the exchange. Psychological control increases when the other person believes they can move you. There is also a deep conditioning at play. From childhood, people are trained to believe that explaining themselves leads to safety. Teachers demand reasons. Parents ask for justifications. Authority figures reward compliance through explanation. Over time, the nervous system associates clarification with protection and silence with danger. That programming does not disappear in adulthood. It quietly governs behavior in boardrooms, relationships, and digital spaces. In professional environments, this conditioning is especially visible. A manager questions a decision, and the employee immediately launches into context, rationale, and apology. Even when the choice was sound, the defensive posture reframes the situation as a mistake needing approval. Authority leaks away through every added sentence. The more detailed the defense, the clearer the power imbalance becomes. In relationships, defensiveness operates as emotional submission. When one partner accuses and the other rushes to explain, the dynamic shifts. The accuser gains moral high ground, and the defender becomes reactive. Over time, this establishes a hierarchy where one person defines reality and the other negotiates their place within it. The conflict rarely resolves because the underlying imbalance remains intact. Online, the pattern is amplified. A single hostile comment provokes paragraphs of explanation. The original attacker gains visibility, engagement, and perceived dominance. Observers do not analyze the logic of the defense. They register who appears rattled and who appears composed. Social hierarchy in digital spaces is determined less by correctness and more by emotional control. Defensiveness also narrows perception. When you are explaining yourself, your cognitive resources are consumed by self-protection. You stop observing the other person's motives, inconsistencies, and strategies. This tunnel vision makes manipulation easier. The attacker dictates pace and topic while you scramble to keep up. Psychological control thrives in this asymmetry. Perhaps the most overlooked consequence is that defending yourself trains others how to treat you. Patterns solidify quickly. If people learn that you will always explain, they will always accuse. Not because they are malicious, but because the interaction rewards that behavior. In social hierarchies, behaviors that produce reactions are repeated. Defensiveness is not neutral. It is instructional. The weakness is not in caring about truth. It is in believing that truth alone governs authority. In reality, authority is established through presence, restraint, and the refusal to accept imposed frames. When you instinctively defend yourself, you are not preserving your position. You are lowering it, reinforcing a power imbalance, and signaling that your standing is conditional on external approval. Silence is commonly misread as absence, but in confrontational dynamics, it operates more like pressure when an accusation is delivered. The human nervous system expects friction denial, justification, anger, or submission. These reactions provide orientation. They tell the accuser where they stand. Silence removes that orientation entirely. The result is not calm. It is uncertainty. Neurologically, humans are wired to seek feedback. Social interaction relies on response loops that confirm influence and impact. When someone confronts another person, they are not only expressing an opinion, they are probing for movement. Silence interrupts that loop. The accuser is left without confirmation that their words landed, which triggers discomfort and cognitive strain. The brain begins searching for meaning in the absence of cues. This creates a psychological vacuum. In that void, the mind fills gaps automatically. The accuser starts to question whether their position is secure, whether their accusation was miscalculated, or whether they have misread the social terrain. Because humans are deeply uncomfortable with unresolved tension, most people instinctively try to close the gap themselves. They speak again. They elaborate. They justify. They escalate. This is where silence becomes revealing. As the other person talks to relieve their own discomfort, they disclose far more than they intended. Repetition signals insecurity. Escalation signals emotional investment. Over-justification signals doubt. Each additional sentence narrows their range of plausible motives and exposes the underlying driver of the confrontation. What initially appeared as confidence begins to fracture under its own weight. Silence also functions like a mirror. Without resistance to push against, the accuser is forced to confront their own tone, assumptions, and intent. In many cases, they become aware of how aggressive or manipulative they sound, only because no one is softening the exchange by defending themselves. The lack of reaction reflects their behavior back to them, often uncomfortably. From a Machiavellian perspective, control is exercised through tempo. The person who determines when things move, pause, or conclude holds dominance. Silence seizes control of tempo without overt action. It slows the interaction, stretches time, and forces the other person to operate in a space they did not design. While they rush to regain footing, the silent individual remains centered, observant, and unreadable. This unreadability is itself a form of power. Manipulation depends on predictability. Aggressors rely on emotional triggers to steer behavior. When those triggers fail, the strategy collapses. Non-reactivity deprives them of data. They cannot adjust their approach because they cannot tell what effect they are having. The interaction becomes asymmetrical in favor of the one who withholds response. Consider a workplace confrontation where a colleague accuses you of negligence in a meeting. Instead of immediately countering, you pause. You maintain eye contact. The silence stretches. The colleague begins to qualify their statement, adding details, softening language, or referencing second-hand information. The original accusation dilutes in real time, not because you argued, but because the pressure shifted back onto them. In relationships, silence changes emotional leverage. An accusatory partner expects reassurance or defense. When neither arrives, they are forced to sit with their own emotion. Often, they begin explaining why they feel the way they do, revealing insecurity rather than authority. The dynamic pivots from prosecution to self-exposure without confrontation. Online, non-reactivity collapses provocation. Trolls and manipulators rely on reaction to validate their influence. Silence starves that incentive. When no response arrives, the aggressor either escalates to the point of self-discredit or disengages. In both outcomes, manipulation exposure occurs without effort. Silence is not avoidance. Avoidance is withdrawal driven by fear. Strategic silence is presence without participation in a false frame. It communicates that the accusation does not automatically earn engagement. This refusal is destabilizing because it violates social scripts that assume everyone must defend themselves to be legitimate. The power of silence lies in its restraint. It does not attack. It does not justify. It waits. In that waiting, psychological pressure accumulates on the side that initiated the conflict. The void becomes a pressure chamber where motives surface, control shifts, and the true balance of power is revealed. When a person initiates an attack, they are not only expressing criticism, they are seeking engagement. Engagement confirms relevance, influence, and control. When that engagement is denied, the attacker is left in an unstable position. Their move has been made, but the expected counter never arrives. This imbalance sets the stage for self-exposure. Without resistance, attackers lose calibration. They no longer know how far is too far, or which tactic is effective. The absence of defense removes the usual boundaries that reactions create. As a result, they often escalate, repeating the accusation with increased intensity, adding emotional charge, or introducing new angles in an attempt to provoke a response. Each escalation reveals more about their internal state than about the target of the accusation. Emotional volatility is often the first thing to surface. Frustration appears because the attacker is not being acknowledged in the way they anticipated. Their tone shifts. What began as controlled critique becomes irritation, sarcasm, or anger. Observers notice this shift immediately. The original claim fades into the background as the attacker is emotional. Instability becomes the most salient feature of the interaction. Obsession is another common exposure. When someone continues to press an issue despite receiving no validation, it signals fixation. They return to the same point repeatedly, unable to let it go. This persistence reframes the narrative. Instead of appearing principled, they begin to look consumed. The power reversal occurs quietly as attention moves away from the accusation and toward the behavior driving it. Resentment also leaks through prolonged non-reaction. Subtle language choices, loaded phrasing, and historical grievances surface as the attacker searches for leverage. What was presented as a current issue reveals itself as a long-held grievance. This shift exposes motive. The conflict is no longer about the stated concern, but about unresolved emotions seeking release. Manipulation tactics depend heavily on participation. Gaslighting requires the target to question their perception. Power plays require emotional hooks. When there is no defensive response, these tactics stall. The manipulator cannot redirect reality without feedback. They cannot destabilize someone who refuses to engage with the distorted frame being offered. The attempt collapses under its own weight. Non-reaction also removes the incentive structure that sustains manipulation. Manipulators engage because engagement rewards them with control. Attention, emotional reaction, and justification are currencies. When those currencies are withheld, the cost of continuing the behavior rises. The manipulator must either escalate publicly, risking exposure, or retreat. In both cases, their strategy is revealed. From a Machiavellian standpoint, this is dominance through restraint. Rather than confronting the opponent directly, you allow them space to act themselves into a compromised position. The opponent defeats themselves by revealing too much. This approach avoids overt conflict while achieving a decisive shift in power. The less you do. In professional settings, this dynamic is particularly visible. An employee who does not rush to defend themselves during unfounded criticism often watches the critic over-explain, contradict earlier statements, or appeal to emotion instead of evidence. Colleagues begin to reassess who appears credible. Composure reads as confidence. Volatility reads as insecurity. In social situations, non-reaction reframes perception among observers. When one person remains calm and minimal while another grows increasingly animated, the social hierarchy adjusts in real time. People align with stability. They trust the individual who does not appear desperate to be understood. Psychological dominance emerges without assertion. Interpersonally, restraint dismantles power plays. A partner attempting to provoke guilt or compliance loses leverage when met with quiet acknowledgement rather than defense. The absence of emotional payoff forces introspection or escalation. Either outcome clarifies the true intent behind the behavior. Selective acknowledgement enhances this effect. Brief, neutral responses signal awareness without submission. They deny the attacker the satisfaction of control while maintaining social legitimacy. This balance preserves authority and prevents misinterpretation of silence as weakness. The critical insight is that self-exposure is not forced. It is allowed. By refusing to defend yourself, you create conditions where the other person's behavior becomes the primary evidence. Their words, tone, and persistence speak louder than any explanation ever could. The accusation dissolves as the focus shifts, and the power reversal completes itself without confrontation. Over time, restraint compounds. What begins as a single decision not to react evolves into a recognizable presence. People notice who remains steady under pressure and who scrambles to correct perceptions. Authority is not claimed through verbal victory, but inferred through internal stability. Those who do not rush to defend themselves appear anchored, as if their sense of self is not dependent on immediate approval or consensus. This perception shift is subtle but powerful. When someone consistently refuses to be pulled into reactive exchanges, others stop testing them. Challenges decrease not because conflict was won, but because it was rendered ineffective. Emotional restraint signals that accusations do not penetrate deeply enough to require repair. This creates an impression of psychological untouchability that words alone cannot manufacture. A critical distinction emerges between acknowledging facts and accepting imposed identities. You can recognize information without accepting the narrative attached to it. Selective agreement allows you to concede what is objectively true while remaining emotionally neutral toward the interpretation. This protects self-definition. It prevents others from labeling you, reducing complex identity into a single accusation or moment. Restraint preserves energy. Every defensive exchange drains cognitive and emotional resources. Strategic authority involves choosing where attention goes. By refusing to engage with false frames, you conserve bandwidth for decisions that actually matter. This conservation is not passive. It is an assertion of sovereignty over your time, focus, and image. Narrative control follows naturally. When you do not rush to correct every misunderstanding, you stop reinforcing the idea that every opinion deserves response. Over time, others learn that access to your explanation is not automatic. This scarcity increases perceived value. In power psychology, what is not easily extracted carries more weight than what is freely given. Machiavellian philosophy addresses this directly. Power erodes when you treat others' opinions as verdicts. When you internalize judgment, you outsource authority. When you observe it without reaction, you retain it. Modern perception management is less about persuasion and more about non-attachment. The less you chase approval, the less leverage others have. Observers play a crucial role in this dynamic. People instinctively align with composure. In group settings, the individual who remains calm while others grow reactive becomes the implicit reference point. Their presence stabilizes the environment. Authority presence is recognized, not announced. It emerges from consistency under pressure. Emotional neutrality reinforces this effect. Neutrality does not mean indifference. It means clarity. It communicates that emotions are chosen responses, not automatic reactions. This choice is deeply unsettling to those who rely on emotional contagion to influence outcomes. They lose their primary tool. Over time, restraint reshapes self-perception as well. When you stop defending yourself reflexively, you stop experiencing yourself as someone perpetually on trial. The internal narrative shifts. You no longer move through interactions seeking exoneration. You move with the assumption of legitimacy. This internal shift is where real power consolidates. Perception control is not manipulation of others, but alignment with yourself. Authority grows when your behavior consistently reflects inner certainty. There is nothing to prove because proof implies doubt. There is nothing to justify because justification implies dependency. Emotional restraint becomes a baseline state rather than a strategy. In this state, accusations lose their gravitational pull. Opinions pass through without lodging. Conflict becomes information rather than threat. Power psychology at its highest level is quiet. It is the ability to remain unchanged by attempts to define you. Restraint ceases to be something you do and becomes something you are, an internal orientation that renders external judgment irrelevant and preserves authority without effort.